Homies! Oh no!
You don't look like someone who flies first class. That was the first sentence Malik Carter heard at gate 12A. Not good morning. Not boarding pass, please. Just that. He blinked once, the words landing with a silence louder than any overhead announcement. The flight attendant's smile didn't move, but the message was already clear. Her name tag read Samantha Reed. Her eyes read something else entirely. Malik didn't argue. He simply held out his ticket, seat 1A printed in clean black ink. A seat he had booked 3 weeks earlier for a direct flight from Boston to Seattle. First class. No upgrades. No favors. Samantha tilted the pass, squinting at it like it was written in a foreign language. There must be a system error, she said sweetly. This seat is usually reserved for our priority guests. Behind Malik, Trevor Blackstone stepped forward, white, grinning, wearing a suit that cost more than most cars. No ticket check. No questions. Just a champagne flute placed in his hand before he even reached the jet bridge. You don't look like someone who flies first class. Those words hung in the air again, echoing inside Malik's chest. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't demand an explanation. He just turned, walked toward the economy section, and took seat 22A like it was any other Thursday morning. But what happened next was not routine. What began as quiet discrimination was about to ripple through 36,000 feet of cabin air, and straight into the heart of an airline that didn't know who it had just tried to overlook. This isn't just another story. This is a black story, one about presence, about power, and about what happens when dignity refuses to shrink for anyone's comfort. If you believe respect should not be optional, hit like, share this video with someone who needs to see it, and subscribe for more untold truths. Now, let's take you inside Flight 317, where a storm was about to break, and one man's silence was louder than 100 headlines. Malik Carter sat in seat 22A, back straight, eyes on the window. The hum of the aircraft filled the cabin like static behind a conversation that no one wanted to start. Outside, the Boston tarmac shimmered under the morning sun. Inside, Malik's breath was steady, but his mind moved like a river beneath ice, calm on the surface, cold with memory underneath. He had flown this route dozens of times. As the CEO of North Star Dynamics, he had negotiated billion-dollar deals, met with cabinet-level officials, and spoken at Harvard Business School twice. But none of that mattered at Gate 12A. Not this morning. Not to the woman who looked at his skin and rewrote his story. Malik reached into his carry-on, pulled out a sleek black phone, and unlocked it with a glance. A hidden app rested on the home screen, one he had built years ago, not for himself, but for moments like this. Sentinel Protocol. A digital paper trail system, designed to quietly log injustices in real time, linked to internal networks across multiple transportation and hospitality providers. He tapped the icon. A silent camera activated, recording from the phone's front-facing lens. He aimed it downward, not to catch faces, but to capture his boarding pass, the seat number, and the quiet around him. No confrontation. No commentary. Just truth, recorded as it unfolded. A woman across the aisle leaned over and whispered to her husband, "He's too calm." That's not good. Malik heard her, but didn't react. His strength had never been in volume. It was in precision, in restraint, in understanding the difference between escalation and elevation. He looked down at his watch. 22 minutes until takeoff. He leaned back and exhaled slowly, letting his shoulders release the tension he didn't show. He knew this was not about a seat. It was about a pattern. One that counted on silence, on compliance, on exhaustion. But Malik wasn't tired. Not today. He slid his phone into the seat back pocket, where it would continue recording silently. Then he rested his hands in his lap, fingers interlocked, waiting, not for vengeance, but for accountability. This wasn't the first time Malik had been overlooked. But if he had anything to say about it, it would be the last time it happened without consequence. Alicia Romero never traveled without her camera. Not the heavy DSLR she used for assignments, but the small, sharp-lensed device clipped discreetly to the strap of her crossbody bag. Light enough to forget, powerful enough to document anything worth remembering. She was seated 3 rows behind Malik Carter, diagonally across the aisle, where she had the perfect view of the cabin and an unobstructed angle toward the front. She hadn't intended to work today. This trip to Seattle was for a quiet profile on a retired firefighter. Human interest, small town, low stakes. But the moment at Gate 12A, that shifted everything. She had seen it. The pause in the flight attendant's smile. The way her shoulders stiffened when she scanned Malik's boarding pass. The careful words, reserved for our priority guests, floating just above the sting of what they truly meant. She saw the way Trevor Blackstone was ushered in. No questions, no scan, just a glass of champagne before his shoes hit the jet bridge. Alicia wasn't just trained to notice. She was trained to capture. And so, with a practiced swipe, she opened her phone camera and hit record. No narration. No hashtags. Just raw footage. Malik being redirected without cause, his face unreadable, and Samantha Reed turning away like it was standard procedure. It was not. She uploaded the clip before the plane finished boarding. Just under 30 seconds, titled simply, "Guess who didn't get to sit in 1A though he paid for it?" By the time the cabin doors closed, the video had already started moving. Quietly at first. A few likes. A retweet from a local activist in Boston. Then a comment from a former flight attendant. "I've seen this happen more than once. We all know what this is." Alicia watched the numbers tick upward like an elevator headed for the top floor. Her fingers hovered over the screen, considering whether to add context. But something told her the footage didn't need her voice. It spoke for itself. From her seat, she angled the camera again, zooming in slightly toward Malik, now sitting still, composed, in 22A. She didn't know who he was, yet. But she knew what she had witnessed. Discretion used as discrimination. Professional tone masking personal bias. Alicia had built her career documenting truths people didn't want to see. And what happened at Gate 12A? It was truth. Clear as day. Trevor Blackstone reclined in seat 1A like he owned it. He adjusted the cuffs of his pale blue shirt, letting the gold links catch the morning light. A thin silver watch rested perfectly on his wrist, the kind worn not to tell time, but to show status. The flight attendant, Samantha Reed, hovered nearby with the practiced grace of someone used to serving the powerful, or at least those who acted like they were. She poured a second glass of champagne before the first one was empty. Trevor barely nodded in thanks. He was already mid-conversation with a man in 1B, bragging about a private dinner with a senator and a weekend yacht event off the coast of Cape Cod. His voice carried across the cabin like someone used to being overheard and admired. "Nothing like having your name on the manifest," Trevor said, swirling his drink. "Makes the whole world move smoother." Samantha smiled at the comment. Not because it was funny, but because she knew her place in this particular script. Behind the first-class curtain, the rest of the cabin bustled with the usual pre-departure motions. Bags stowed. Devices silenced. But in 1A, it was a different kind of air. Quiet, exclusive, untouched by the energy of the rest of the aircraft. Leah Thompson, a junior flight attendant, watched from the galley as Samantha doted on Trevor. Leah had been on enough flights to recognize the subtle shift in tone when certain passengers boarded, when smiles became softer, voices sweeter, and priority seemed to mean something other than what was printed on the boarding pass. She glanced down at the manifest on her tablet. Seat 1A. Assigned to Carter, Malik. Not Blackstone, Trevor. The discrepancy was small, but not invisible. She didn't say anything. Not yet. But the unease sat heavy in her chest, a feeling she'd learned not to ignore. In the cabin behind them, Malik Carter sat in 22A, silent. Not unaware. Just observing. And in the first-class cabin, Trevor Blackstone lifted his glass again, to no one in particular, and said, "Cheers to knowing the right people." Samantha smiled. But Leah looked away. The question was no longer whether seat 1A was reserved. The question was, for him. And who gets to decide what priority really means when power speaks softly and prejudice wears a uniform? In a climate-controlled operations room 3 stories above Logan Airport's main terminal, a soft chime lit up a single monitor. The screen belonged to Harold Lynn, Director of Flight Operations. He had spent 2 decades handling flight delays, airspace reroutes, and security escalations. But the notification blinking now was different. It wasn't from TSA, FAA, or weather radar. It was from Sentinel Protocol. The file ID read, Passenger Carter, Malik, Seat Reassignment Review Requested. Embedded within the alert was live cabin footage, time-stamped, and a note marked Urgent, Priority Reassignment Without Cause. Harold tapped into the security stream. Within seconds, he saw it. Malik's boarding pass scanned, Samantha's pause, the redirection, and the champagne glass welcome offered to another man. He didn't need audio to understand what had just happened. He could read the body language fluently. This wasn't a glitch. It was a choice. Harold toggled the alert up the chain, flagging the cockpit of Flight 317. In the flight deck, Captain Denise Holloway had just finished pre-takeoff checks when the notification slid across her screen. Her brow furrowed. She read the file, watched the video, and scrolled through the manifest. Seat 1A, she muttered. Assigned to Carter. She looked toward the closed cabin door, the sounds of first-class service muffled behind it. With one tap, she opened the intercom to the flight crew. Her voice, calm but unmistakably firm, came through. Samantha, please report to the cockpit at your earliest convenience. Samantha appeared less than a minute later, posture straight, smile in place. You called, Captain? Captain Holloway didn't bother with pleasantries. She turned the screen toward Samantha and played the clip silently. Then, she asked the only question that mattered. Why was Mr. Carter reassigned? Samantha's response was smooth, practiced. There was a last-minute VIP request. I didn't want to delay departure. Captain Holloway nodded once. Then said, there will be no delay. But there will be a correction. She stood. Flight attendants rarely saw captains leave the cockpit once pre-check was complete. But now, with the plane still grounded, the captain walked down the aisle, past the curtain, past the champagne, toward 22A. Malik looked up. Mr. Carter, she said, offering her hand. Your seat is ready. Let's get you back where you belong. The cabin fell still. Some passengers looked up. Some pretended not to. But they all heard it. The return of authority, not in volume, but in value. Not in command, but in correction. And for the first time that morning, the seat marked 1A began to mean something again. The aisle stretched ahead of Captain Denise Holloway like a quiet runway. Every step she took was measured, not rushed, not dramatic, just deliberate. In a cabin tuned to routine, even a small break in rhythm feels like thunder. As she approached row 22, conversations tapered off. Passengers leaned slightly into the aisle, pretending not to watch. But they were watching. Everyone was. Malik Carter stood as the captain stopped in front of him. He didn't speak first. He didn't need to. Captain Holloway met his gaze with calm authority. Mr. Carter, I've reviewed what happened at boarding. It was not consistent with our policies or with the standard of respect every passenger deserves. Seat 1A is yours. I'm here to personally escort you there. Malik nodded once. Not in surprise, but in recognition. He gathered his carry-on bag and stepped into the aisle, tall, composed. As they walked forward, the tension followed like a second shadow. Trevor Blackstone, still lounging in 1A, looked up mid-sit. He froze for a half-second as he saw the captain leading another man toward what he had claimed as his seat. Then came the subtle shuffle. Trevor stood, adjusting his jacket, moving stiffly to 2C, trying to make the relocation seem like a business-class preference rather than what it truly was. Captain Holloway gestured toward the seat. Mr. Carter. Malik placed his bag overhead and sat down without a word. He didn't look at Trevor. He didn't look at Samantha, who was now lingering in the galley, her face unreadable. Alicia Romero, 3 rows back, lifted her phone without hesitation. She hit record again, not for drama, not for clicks, but because truth often arrives without announcement. And this was a moment worth remembering. Within seconds, the clip was live. The caption read, "Captain intervenes. The rightful seat is restored. Integrity flies today." As the last few passengers boarded and stowed their bags, the plane returned to its usual rhythm. But something had shifted. The silence was no longer heavy. It was purposeful. In seat 1A, Malik rested his back against the leather and folded his hands loosely in his lap. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't demanded anything. But here he was. And now the entire cabin, and soon the world, would know why. By the time Flight 317 reached cruising altitude, the story had already left the cabin. It was climbing just as fast, through LTE towers, across Wi-Fi networks, and into a storm of phones, retweets, and rapidly growing comment threads. Alicia Romero's second clip hit a nerve. In less than 15 minutes, it was picked up by a civil rights attorney in Chicago, a viral commentary page in Atlanta, and a retired flight attendants group on Facebook. Each repost came with its own headline. Captain restores justice at 30,000 feet. The power of calm. Black CEO silently corrects the system. Integrity wears wings. The hashtag dignity in the air was born quietly, but it spread like wind on dry grass. Then came the questions. Who was the man in 1A? Why was he removed in the first place? And what made the captain step in, on record, on camera? Alicia didn't need to add commentary. The footage spoke clearly. A black man, calm and composed, had been quietly stripped of the seat he paid for. Then, without protest, he had watched it corrected, not by outrage, but by action. That alone was enough to trigger a conversation far bigger than one flight. Within the hour, tweets turned into articles. Journalists from 3 major outlets requested interviews. A popular podcast DM'd Alicia, asking to feature her the same night. And then, Malik's name surfaced. Someone recognized him from a business leadership panel last year. Another remembered his keynote at a tech equity summit in San Francisco. Soon, screenshots of him in a charcoal suit, standing beside industry leaders and policymakers, began to circulate. "That's Malik Carter," someone tweeted. "CEO of North Star Dynamics. You denied him first class? Imagine how you treat people without a title." The comment exploded. What began as a quiet incident at a boarding gate had now become a symbol. Not just of racial bias in travel, but of how dignity, when protected with composure, can shift the weight of an entire system. In seat 1A, Malik glanced at his phone. Notifications flooded the lock screen. He didn't open them. He knew what they said. He had seen this cycle before. But this time, he hadn't just been part of the moment. He had shaped it. Outside the window, the sky was endless. And down below, a very different kind of turbulence was beginning. Leah Thompson had always known how to stay invisible. As a junior flight attendant, she had learned the art of smooth presence. Polished, polite, and quiet. She followed instructions. She kept her head down. She smiled even when the tone behind the words didn't deserve a smile. It was survival. On this flight, she had watched everything. From the moment Malik Carter was politely redirected, to the way Trevor Blackstone was offered champagne without question. She had felt the discomfort stir in her gut, a quiet unrest she had trained herself to suppress. But when Captain Holloway walked down that aisle, when she escorted Malik back to seat 1A without a raised voice or a performance, something in Leah shifted. It was not the gesture itself. It was the clarity of it. Later in the flight, with the cabin lights dimmed and the aisle calm, Leah walked toward first class with a tray of warm towels. She stopped briefly at Malik's row. "Mr. Carter," she said softly, leaning in just enough to speak without being overheard. "I just wanted to say, I saw what happened. All of it. Malik turned slightly, meeting her eyes. I didn't speak up at the gate, Leah continued. And I'm not proud of that. But I'm saying something now. Not because of your title, but because of how you handled it. There was no apology, just truth. Spoken plainly, with weight. Malik gave a small nod. Thank you for saying that, he replied, voice even. It matters. And it did. Because Leah wasn't the captain. She wasn't a journalist. She wasn't an executive with influence. She was one of hundreds of quiet workers in a system that too often rewarded silence over integrity. But now she had chosen to speak. Not loudly, just clearly. As she walked back down the aisle, the towel tray light in her hands, her steps felt different. More grounded. She had always thought neutrality kept her safe. But on Flight 317, she realized, there is no such thing as neutral in the face of exclusion. You're either a witness who stays silent, or a witness who becomes part of the truth. And today, Leah Thompson had chosen the latter. The descent into Seattle was smooth, almost too smooth. Outside the window, the gray sky parted just enough to reveal the coastline, a blanket of clouds draping the city like a secret. Inside the cabin, however, there was no illusion of calm. Passengers began to stir, reaching for bags and straightening seatbacks. But the usual chatter was replaced by something heavier, an awareness. Everyone knew, in some way, that this flight would not end like others. Malik Carter remained still in seat 1A. His seatbelt remained fastened. His hands rested lightly on his lap, but his mind was nowhere near the cabin. His phone vibrated again. He didn't reach for it. He already knew the conversation had grown beyond hashtags and headlines. It had become something else, a reflection of the industry's deepest cracks, now projected across news feeds, blogs, and live panels prepping their coverage before the wheels even touched the ground. The captain's voice broke the silence. Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our final approach into Seattle-Tacoma International. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened and tray tables are in their upright positions. Samantha Reed stood at the front of first class, her posture stiff. She performed the cabin checks with efficiency, but her eyes avoided Malik's row. She knew the landing wouldn't be routine for her either. Leah passed quietly through the cabin, collecting cups and wrappers, her expression focused but composed. When she reached Malik, she didn't pause long. Just a nod. A mutual understanding. As the wheels touched down with a firm, decisive thud, the cabin jolted forward slightly. Seatbelt signs chimed. Passengers exhaled. But nobody rushed to stand. Then the murmur started. Voices from the front. A glimpse of camera flashes through the window. A security team visible at the jet bridge. The cabin crew had been informed. Media was waiting. So was a team from Apex Airlines Corporate. So was the FAA. Malik finally reached for his phone. On the lock screen, a new notification blinked from the Apex executive comms line. Ground response confirmed. Press briefing window requested. FAA presence authorized. Protocol status active. He read it once, then locked the phone again. As the aircraft rolled to the gate, passengers began gathering their belongings. But this wasn't the usual race to exit. This was different. Something unspoken passed row to row. A respect, maybe. Or discomfort. Or curiosity. Whatever it was, it followed Malik as he stood. He wasn't walking off just another plane. He was stepping into a spotlight he never asked for, but fully owned. The boardroom on the 22nd floor of Apex Airlines headquarters wasn't designed for crisis. With its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Seattle's skyline and brushed steel fixtures reflecting soft afternoon light, it projected calm, structure, and control. But today, control was an illusion. Executives sat with tablets open, brows furrowed. A large display on the wall streamed live engagement metrics, clips of Malik Carter boarding, being turned away, being returned to his rightful seat. Sentiment analysis graphs updated every few seconds, spiking red, then yellow, then deep blue. The trend was impossible to ignore. Dominic Reynolds, the chief operating officer, paced quietly behind his chair. "Where is legal?" he asked. "Reviewing liability," someone answered without looking up. "Where is Samantha Reed?" he asked again. "In a private holding area with HR," came the reply. Then the doors opened. Malik Carter walked in. No entourage. No statement. Just presence. The room shifted. Eyes turned toward him. Some out of respect. Others with quiet panic. The CEO of North Star Dynamics was not just a customer now. He was the center of a storm they had failed to see coming. "I didn't ask for this meeting," Malik said calmly. "But since you've called it, let's not waste the moment." He pulled a slim laptop from his briefcase, connected it to the room's main display, and opened a file titled Passenger Dignity Audit Proposal. "For the past year," he began, "your discretionary seat reassignments have gone unmonitored. There are patterns, predictable ones, uncomfortable ones. I know because I've seen them happen. To me. And to others." The room was silent except for the soft hum of the ventilation system. "I'm recommending the immediate creation of a Passenger Integrity Council," he continued. "It would include external civil rights advocates, internal compliance officers, and a public reporting mechanism. Every discretionary reassignment would require co-signature from the captain and review within 24 hours. A hand raised at the far end of the table. "And if we don't implement that?" one VP asked. Malik didn't blink. "Then you'll answer to the public. Because that conversation has already started, and this company is not driving it." There were no dramatic pauses. No threats. Just facts. The room stayed quiet, but the tension was unmistakable. They weren't debating a seat anymore. They were debating the soul of their system, and the cost of pretending it hadn't failed. By sunset, decisions had been made. Samantha Reed sat across from two Apex Airlines HR representatives in a quiet room on the 6th floor. Her uniform was still crisp. Her posture remained upright. But her confidence had begun to fray at the edges. She had replayed the moment at Gate 12A dozens of times since the landing. Each time, her justifications grew thinner. The words she had used, calculated, polite, rehearsed, now echoed back as hollow. "I didn't mean to offend him," she said for the third time. One of the HR officers looked up. "But you did. And intent doesn't erase impact." The meeting was short. Her suspension was immediate. A full review would follow. But internally, leadership had already decided this wasn't just a disciplinary case. It was a message. Meanwhile, in the crew break room, Leah Thompson received a quiet request from Apex's Director of Culture and Compliance. They wanted her to help lead the upcoming ethics training redesign, something more than a slideshow, more than a checkbox course. They wanted it built by someone who had witnessed the system from inside and had chosen to speak. She hesitated, surprised. "But I'm just a junior crew member." "Exactly," the director said. "That's who systems fail first. And that's who should help rebuild them." Elsewhere, Trevor Blackstone sat inside a luxury hotel suite, scrolling through the latest headlines. His name hadn't been in the original post, but by now, the internet had done its work. Photos from his public appearances had been matched to the footage. A caption circled on social media read, "The man who took a seat without asking why it was empty." The comment sections were relentless. Some mocked his entitlement. Others questioned his silence. Trevor tried to craft a statement but deleted it twice. No phrasing felt right when the core truth was this: he had benefited from an act of exclusion and said nothing. And for someone who built his career on leadership optics, that silence came at a steep cost. In contrast, Malik Carter remained composed as the hours passed. He didn't celebrate Samantha's suspension. He didn't gloat about the headlines. Instead, he focused on the structural changes he had started. This wasn't about punishing individuals. It was about revealing a pattern and forcing those in power to reckon with the quiet moments where fairness dies and no one notices. Until someone finally does. A week after Flight 317 landed in Seattle, Malik Carter stood at the podium of the National Transportation Equity Forum in Washington, D.C. The room was filled with airline executives, union leaders, lawmakers, and aviation professionals from across the country. He wasn't supposed to speak that day. His name had only been added to the agenda 48 hours earlier. But when he stepped to the microphone, no one left for coffee. No one checked their phones. He began without notes. "It was never about the seat," he said plainly. "Not for me. Not for anyone who's ever been quietly removed, silently dismissed, or politely redirected." He paused, letting the words breathe. "I paid for 1A. But so have many others, who didn't get a captain's intervention, who didn't have a camera rolling, who didn't trend on social media." He looked out across the room. "You want to talk about equity? Then start with how systems quietly excuse the erosion of dignity. Start with how bias hides behind discretion. Start with how it's always easier to move a passenger than to move a policy." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He closed with this: "Seats can be assigned. Status can be bought. But respect must be protected. At every level. On every flight. For every person." A quiet applause began. Not loud, but lasting. And long after he left that stage, the conversations continued, not about one man's experience, but about how many had remained invisible. Malik knew he hadn't changed an industry in a day. But he had lit a signal. And more importantly, he had shown that stillness is not surrender, and silence, when chosen, can become power. So, if you've ever been told to step aside when you had every right to stand tall, if you've ever watched someone stay calm while carrying the weight of being overlooked, this story is yours, too. Because this wasn't just about one airline. This was about all the places where quiet harm goes unspoken. Let's stop letting it stay that way. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that calm can be courageous, that presence is its own form of protest, then take one small action now. Like this video. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe for more Black stories that uncover what too many are still taught to ignore. We are not done. The next flight is already boarding.